It's about 7:40 all across the length and breadth of Guyana, and of course you're locked in here to 94 number one and Jumpstart, the sound of good radio all across the 592, taking care of these 83,000 square miles. And as we promised you early this morning, we have joining us for our Jumpstart interview today the U.S. Ambassador to Guyana. Her name is Sarah Ann Lynch, and we've got her joining us live. Good morning, Ambassador. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Gordon. I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I am going pretty good down here in Georgetown, and I know you've been practicing those safety measures also.
I indeed am. So I'm tuning in today from my residence, and all of these kind of new ways of working provide a few challenges, but can you hear me okay? And
I am hearing
is it all working?
I am hearing you pretty clear, and that's good.
Okay.
So it's like a new way of doing everything now. Everything is by Zoom or Skype.
I know. I hope I get to your studio again someday. But in the meantime, we're lucky that we can operate in this manner.
And so I'm very happy that you decided to give us this interview this morning. And Ambassador, I know the elections, that's a big topic right now that everyone is talking about. We have a recount underway. Right. And I was reading a report in Kaitru News, I think 2 days ago. They were talking about the observers for the recount. And we know that you wrote to the president, hoping to get the Carter Center and IRI, that International Republican Institute, back here. And based on that Kaitru report, they're saying you intend to write again?
That is true, was true, and we've already written. So yes, we are very interested in getting the Carter Center and IRI back here to complete their work as international observers and as technical advisors. And they've been invited in, Gordon, by GCOM, by the chairwoman herself. And they didn't get to complete their work because, of course, the election is still ongoing. So they're still accredited, and they would very much like to come back in. And frankly, we think it's a good idea to have a more robust international observation effort. It's just terrific that the CARICOM scrutineers are here, as well as a couple of folks from the OAS. But if you add up those numbers, it's only 5, and there are 10 counting stations. And I understand they may even add more counting stations because the process has been moving a bit slowly. So there really aren't even enough international observers for each counting station. So it would be wonderful if possible, if a couple more observers could come back. And those are the ones that we're focused on.
So what are you hoping to hear from the president at this time? Because the last time his foreign affairs minister responded and explained the situation with the health measures. So what are you hoping with this next letter?
Well, of course, the Carter Center and IRI have both agreed to comply with whatever measures need to be complied with to adhere to the guidance from the Ministry of Public Health on the COVID-19 issue, which is extraordinarily serious. So they're willing and able to get tested. I think they're looking into that right now, so that they will be ready to get on a flight should there be one that we can arrange. So we're hoping that the COVID-19 task force recommends to the president that this be approved. My understanding is he is the final step in that approval process.
But during that recount that is currently ongoing, we have the OAS, they're a part of the observation group. We have the European Union, they're a part of that. We have the American Chamber of Commerce, AmCham, they're a part of that. The Private Sector Commission, they're a part of that, as well as the American, British, and Canadian diplomats, the diplomatic community. They're also a part of that recount. So I'm trying to get from you, the Carter Center said they only have one person available right now, and IRI, that International Republican Institute, they were never an accredited observer group. So I'm trying to get, what will the Carter Center, that one observer from the Carter Center, see that the American, British, Canadian, AmCham, European Union, and OAS cannot see, as well as all of these party agents that are in every single one of those current counting stations?
Right. Thank you for the question, Gordon. Actually, there's a difference. You mentioned a couple of different groups there. There are international observers, there are domestic observers, and there are technical advisors. So in terms of international observation, that would be groups like CARICOM, OAS, EU, Carter Center, etc. And out of that group, I'm not aware of any EU observers that are here right now. I'm only aware of the 3 from CARICOM and 2 from OAS, so just 5 international observers, whereas for the on election day, there were about 50 people from the EU, a very robust effort from the OAS and the Commonwealth, I think I left out. So it was a much more robust effort. We know we're not going to get that level of international observation given the closed airspace, et cetera. But a few more people would certainly be helpful. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then the domestic observers are, of course, some of those that you mentioned, like the American Chamber of Commerce, the Private Sector Commission, and some others. And then there are members of the diplomatic community, which is a little bit separate. Our numbers have gone down just like other embassies here because we've had to repatriate some of our own staff given the COVID-19 issue to make sure that they are safe. So we don't have as many people as we did back on March 2nd either. And then technical advisors, when you talk about IRI, they're actually technical advisors that were invited in by GCOM, and they had been working here since November, again, providing advice. And there are some other people. I know there is somebody here from the Commonwealth that is a technical advisor. So it is likely that all of these observers and advisors, whether they're international or domestic, will see similar things. That is correct. I think the difference between the international observers and the other groups is that they are well trained on what the electoral procedures are and the Constitution of Guyana, etc. And so they are very clear on the specific things that they are looking for. So I think a more robust effort would give the citizens confidence that the recount is transparent, and so when it comes to conclusion, that it can be deemed free, fair, and credible.
But in the absence of their return, would you agree that the recount process can still be deemed free, fair, and credible once it's completed under the eyes of CARICOM and under the eyes of the OAS and under the eyes of those other observers who are here?
I don't think there are enough people to have as robust an effort as we had for the original on election day, for example. So our position is that it would be better to have that more robust effort. Again, Gordon, with the end result that the citizens of Guyana feel that the whole process was transparent and credible, and that all Guyanese voices were heard.
But do you think one observer coming in from the Carter Center would make much of a difference if you're talking about needing a robust observer group? Because they're the only ones who will be coming in as observers. That one person from the Carter Center, IRI, as you said, they offer technical advice. So they're not going to be up there doing observing of the recount.
Thank you for the question, Gordon. Actually, my understanding is it's more than one person.
Okay.
Again, we are attempting to be completely compliant with all measures related to the virus as well, so it won't be as big an effort as they had before. But my understanding is it's more than one. And yes, I do think they will lend additional credibility to the process because the Carter Center, as you may know, has been in Guyana off and on for 3 decades, and they've observed all of the last elections in recent history. And so they do definitely lend additional credibility to the process. And as this process has gone on for so very long, it's now more than 10 weeks since election day, I think any additional credibility will be good for the citizens of Guyana.
But you would agree that even in the absence, and I'm going to go back to that question, even in the absence of their presence, we can still have a credible process, a credible result based on those who are here now, this scrutinizing by CARICOM and all of those other observers present, that we can still have a credible election result.
I I would hope that there will be a credible result and the process will be transparent no matter who is here. But what I would like to see is the citizens have complete confidence. And I think with a more robust effort, that would happen.
And there was an interview recently by U.S. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, and he raised some concerns about the involvement of your country, the U.S., in these elections. He called it interference. What do you call it?
I call it good diplomacy. As you know, Gordon, because I know you always do your homework and your research, and all the statements that the U.S. government is making now in 2020 were nearly identical to those that we made in 2015. The difference being there was a different party in power and a different party in the opposition. So the statements that we're making today, they very much mirror, again, those in 2015. So if it is interference today, it was interference in 2015. And I don't hear people calling it interference in 2015. In addition, I would say I think we're in pretty good company because all of the statements that we've made here in Georgetown, that the State Department has made with Assistant Secretary Kozak and Secretary Pompeo and the National Security Council, they're also very similar to statements that have been made by those international observer groups that were here en masse for the election, and that includes CARICOM, the Commonwealth, the OAS, and the EU. In addition, there have been a number of other countries besides the ABCEU that have made similar statements, and those would include France, Norway, India. And so everybody is calling for these elections to be free, fair, and credible. And if you add up all the members of those organizations, plus the bilateral, the separate countries that I mentioned, it's over 130. So that would mean that 130 plus countries have interfered.
But that's coming from.
I don't think that's the case, Gordon.
But that's coming from a U.S. congressman who raised the concern because, as you would have noted, those other countries, you're not seeing their Secretary of State or their Foreign Minister or their Under Secretary of State or Deputy Foreign Minister tweeting almost every other week about these elections. We've had at least 5 to 6 tweets from Mr. Kozak, and we've had a couple from Mr. Pompeo, in addition to the local statements that would have come from the embassy. In addition, for this past week alone, we saw 5 senators one day, then we saw 6 congressmen another day sending out statements. Is there a concern that lobbying is playing a role in these amount of statements that are coming out? Because I covered 5 elections in Guyana, and I cannot remember a single time when we would have seen this amount of statements, especially when we look at those coming from congressmen and those coming from senators. And it's happening in a time and an era where we have one party hiring a lobbying firm in the U.S. and another party now going to do the same. So do you think that is playing a role in what we've been seeing, and that's why you're seeing the amount of statements and the concern about interference?
Well, first of all, I go back to your initial comment about other countries and their capitals not commenting on the process. I do draw your attention to London and Ottawa and other capitals that are making these comments. So that's one thing. Secondly, with regard to the one congressman that made that comment recently, that's a separate branch of government, Gordon, and they opine on all sorts of things. That's the legislature. I'm in the executive branch. It's important when people, whether they're in the executive branch or the legislature, have all the factual information. And I think that's my goal, is to talk about evidence and talk about facts. So when you discuss this issue of interference, I have to continue to bring you back to 2015, because there certainly were many statements, and there was an uptick in those statements, and we stand by them. We stood by them in 2015. We stand by them in 2020. And our goal as a U.S. government is to continue to bring people back to the issue of democracy. And so when we issue these statements, we're trying to not get mired down in the details of the Guyanese process, but elevate the conversation to the issue of democracy. And it is very important that if any country is going to call themselves a democracy, which was recently stated by the ambassadors of the CARICOM, or the ministers, prime ministers and such of the CARICOM nations, that if you're a member of this unique club called democracies, then you need to adhere to those democratic principles. And as the CARICOM folks said, that if you don't, then it doesn't just hurt your country, it hurts all the member countries of that group that you belong to as well. So in the U.S. government's case, we do keep trying to bring people back to the issue of democracy and the importance of adhering to your electoral process.
But again, do you think lobbying has played a greater role in these statements coming out? Because we know the reality that there are lobbying firms out there hired by local political groups. And do you think that would have played a role in many of these statements coming out from your congressman and from your Secretary of State and from your Assistant Secretary of State?
Oh, thank you for the question, Gordon. That does seem to be a new business, and it is true that there are lobbyists in Washington advocating for interests of whoever hired them, and that's the case in Guyana as well. The important thing is that there's balance. If we meet with advocates for one party, we meet with advocates for another party. And I can tell you, for me, I have made it a personal goal whenever I have a conversation with folks that are representing the interests of one, I make sure I have a phone call or meeting with those representing the interests of another, so that I have the full breadth and depth of the issues that they want to present. And I've never said no to anybody that wants me to listen to their point of view. And I would say that's the same in Washington as well, that if people want to present their views, they are more than welcome to, and we listen to them. But at the same time, we don't end there. We do our homework. We do our research, and so that we have all the information at our fingertips.
So have you been lobbied by any of the groups? Any of those lobbying groups?
I don't know what you mean by lobbied, but I have met with, again, people who are advocating for one party, and I've met people who are advocating for another party. I've also met people who are advocating for the many small parties here. Gordon, I meet lots of people. My job since I've arrived here, which I think you were one of the first interviews I did about a year ago, and my job has been to fully educate myself on all the issues in Guyana, whether they be political, electoral, business. I've certainly met everyone that has wanted to talk to me about the elections, but not at the expense of talking to people in the business community, in the arts community. I would say the one area that I could do better in terms of balance is in the sports community. I think I've only met with cricket players.
Okay. And of course, as we get ready to wrap up, got just about a minute and a half to wrap up. And I'm going to end where I began, about that letter you have since written to the president. Two quick things. Has he responded as yet? And if he says no again, based on COVID-19 measures, what's your next move?
Thank you, Gordon. I have to say I don't believe the President or the COVID-19 task force has had the opportunity to review this correspondence yet. It was just recently sent, and so we may get an answer today, and we may not. So, well, we're hopeful that there will be a positive response. I have to say that. And we'll continue to advocate, again, for this robust electoral observation team, because we really think that is key to this effort. And I just want to end by saying, Gordon, to you and your listeners, you know, as I've been saying for a very long time here, the U.S. government has no preference in the outcome of this election. What we have a preference for is that the process be followed appropriately, and that Guyana adhere to democratic principles. And I fully expect that that will be the case, and we fully anticipate that our observers will be allowed back into the country.
Well, thanks a lot, Madam Ambassador, for chatting with us this morning. Hope you're going to have a good day and continue being safe.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Great to hear
one.
you. Great to see you again.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Have a good day today. We were talking there with the U.S. Ambassador to Guyana, Sarah Ann Lynch, sharing her thoughts about the electoral process in Guyana and telling us that she has dispatched another letter to the president trying to get that Carter Center Observer Group and that International Republican Institute group into Guyana to be a part of that recount process that is ongoing at the international, what is it called? The Arthur Chung Convention Center, sorry. So that's ongoing today. This is 94 number 1. You're locked into Jumpstart. The news is up next.